The grand palace of Empress Aurelia stood tall on the outskirts of the galaxy, a place of beauty and wealth. Yet, on this special day, the birthday of its ruler, the halls were eerily quiet. The servants, though dutiful, seemed more like shadows, going about their tasks with little more than polite glances exchanged. Even the royal guards, usually stoic and watchful, seemed to be distracted. It was as if the entire palace had forgotten what today meant. Inside the Empress's chambers, Aurelia sat in her ornate wheelchair, a gift from the finest engineers in the kingdom. She had once been a powerful figure, able to stand tall in the face of any challenge. But that had been before the assassination attempt that had shattered her body and left her paralyzed. It had been a long time since that dark day, yet the memories still haunted her, and with every passing year, the loneliness grew. The window in her room offered a view of the royal gardens below, but the vibrant flowers and fluttering birds did little to soothe her mind. Today was supposed to be a celebration of her reign, a joyous occasion where she would receive praise from her people. Instead, she felt like a prisoner in her own palace. "Another year," she whispered to herself, running her fingers over the armrest of her chair. She had tried to put on a brave face for the court. Every year, the royal banquet was held in her honor, and every year she feigned happiness as the people cheered for their empress. But the truth was, she couldn't remember the last time she truly felt joy. Aurelia's gaze drifted to the nearby table where a small pile of gifts lay untouched. They were from various officials, all beautiful and costly. But none of them held any meaning. Expensive jewels, rare fabrics, and fine wines, nothing seemed to fill the emptiness inside her heart. She sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. The palace, despite its beauty, felt cold. The walls that once felt like a home now felt like a fortress, impenetrable and isolating. It wasn't that she didn't have allies or advisors. In fact, her royal court was filled with those who looked up to her and sought her guidance. But all of them had their own lives, their own families. The Empress was left alone with her thoughts and memories. Her closest companions were her books and her thoughts, which at times seemed like a prison of their own. Her mind wandered back to her early years before the accident, when she had been a symbol of strength and beauty. She had once been a warrior, leading her troops into battle, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. She had been proud of her strength, proud of her ability to command respect from all who met her. But now all that remained was a fragile woman who could barely leave her chambers without help. Aurelia's fingers tightened around the armrest, her frustration building. She hated feeling this way. She hated the pity she saw in the eyes of her closest advisors when they helped her from one place to another. She hated that she had become a figure of sympathy instead of a figure of power. There was nothing left of the fierce woman who had once commanded armies. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was a signal that the servants had arrived, ready to begin preparations for the royal banquet. It was time to pretend again. Time to put on the mask of the gracious, powerful Empress. "Enter," she called softly. The door opened, and a young servant entered with a tray of food, followed by another who carried a small bouquet of flowers. They smiled politely, their faces kind but distant. "Your Majesty," the first servant said, "we have prepared your favorite meal for the occasion. Will you be dining alone tonight?" Aurelia's heart sank at the question. It was a simple inquiry, but it hit her like a heavy weight. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. "Yes, thank you," she replied, offering a thin smile. The servant set the table and began to arrange the food, but the silence between them was deafening. They moved about in practiced motions, clearly aware of the nature of their work, serving the Empress on her special day. But none of them seemed to truly see her. They were servants, there to do their duty, not to make her feel less alone. Once the servants had finished, they bowed and left the room, leaving her alone once again. The food on the table was untouched, the bouquet of flowers nothing more than a decoration. Aurelia's gaze fell upon the meal. It was perfectly prepared, a feast fit for a queen, yet it didn't tempt her. The idea of celebrating felt foreign to her. How could she celebrate when her heart was weighed down by isolation? She rolled her chair closer to the window, gazing out at the distant stars. The night was beginning to fall, and the sky turned dark, the stars flickering like tiny diamonds in the vastness of space. Somewhere out there, she knew, was a galaxy full of life, full of people who were living and loving. She envied them. But she also knew that her life had been different, set on a path of power and leadership from the moment she was born. She couldn't change who she was, even if she sometimes wished she could. Another lonely birthday, she whispered to herself. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she barely noticed the time passing. The royal banquet would begin soon, but she felt no excitement for it, no eagerness to see the guests or exchange pleasantries. For all the grandeur of the palace, she longed for something more genuine, something real. Just as she was about to turn away from the window, she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a small figure moving toward the palace gates. She squinted, trying to make out who it was, but the person was too far away to see clearly. Aurelia frowned, curious but unsure of who could be approaching her palace at this hour. The figure seemed unimportant at first, just another passerby. But then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt a strange sense of hope stir within her. Maybe, just maybe, tonight wasn't destined to be another lonely birthday. Jax had always been a man of simple means. Born on a distant mining colony, he had learned the value of hard work at a young age. The dusty, grease-stained overalls he wore were a testament to his daily life. A mechanic by trade, tinkering with machines and repairing the tools that kept the royal palace running. He wasn't a man of wealth, nor did he seek fame. His life had been shaped by the sweat of his brow and the small joys of his daughter, Lyra. Lyra was the light of his life. At 6 years old, her laughter was a melody that filled the air wherever they went. She had a knack for making friends, even in the most unlikely places. Jax had lost his wife years ago, and raising Lyra on his own had been a struggle. But he never once regretted it. The bond they shared was stronger than anything he had ever known, and it made the hardships of their lives bearable. On this day, Jax had heard rumors of the Empress's birthday celebrations, and like everyone else in the kingdom, he knew it would be a day of formality and grandeur. However, unlike most, he didn't want to join the pomp and circumstance. Jax had been aware of the Empress's struggles. Despite her power, her isolation was clear to anyone who had ever worked in the palace. "Let's do something special for her," he said to Lyra as they packed up their lunch and headed out of their modest home. Lyra looked up at him with wide eyes. "What do you mean, Papa?" "Well," Jax said, wiping his hands on his overalls, "I know we don't have much, but I thought maybe we could bring her something, a small gift. Something to make her feel less alone." Lyra's face lit up. "A present for the Empress? She's all alone on her birthday?" Jax nodded, and together they set off toward the heart of the city. He had no illusions about their ability to change the world, but a simple act of kindness might brighten her day, even if just for a moment. Along the way, they passed through the bustling streets, the air filled with the sounds of merchants selling their goods and children playing in the alleys. The city was alive, but Jax couldn't help but feel the weight of the day, the weight of the unknown. Would the Empress appreciate their gesture? Would she even notice them? They arrived at the royal gardens, the entrance guarded by 2 towering soldiers. Jax hesitated for a moment before walking up to them. He had never been this close to the palace. He was just a common man, and the palace was reserved for those of noble blood, the rich and powerful. But today, things were different. "Good afternoon," Jax said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I've brought a gift for Her Majesty, a small token for her birthday." The guards looked him up and down, their expressions unreadable. They exchanged a quick glance, and one of them stepped forward. "You're not on the guest list." Jax's heart sank. He wasn't sure how to explain his presence. But before he could respond, Lyra, holding a small bundle of handmade flowers, stepped forward, her bright eyes wide and innocent. "We just want to make the Empress smile," she said, her voice sweet and hopeful. The guards looked at each other. Again, and after a few moments, the one on the left nodded. "Wait here," he said gruffly. The guards went inside, and Jax felt a wave of doubt wash over him. Would they allow him to meet the Empress, or had he made a fool of himself in front of Lyra? But before he could dwell on it too much, the guards returned with a familiar face, one of the palace's advisors. "You're here to see the Empress?" the advisor asked, his expression softening when he noticed the bundle of flowers in Lyra's hands. "Yes," Jax said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Just a small gift for her birthday." The advisor smiled slightly. "I'll take you to her. Follow me." Jax and Lyra walked through the palace gates, their footsteps echoing on the stone path. The palace was even more magnificent than he had imagined. Marble columns stretched up to the high ceiling, and intricate tapestries lined the walls, depicting scenes of victory and triumph. But it was all lost on Jax. His focus was on the little girl beside him and the chance to bring a small amount of joy to the Empress. As they walked through the halls, Jax couldn't help but feel a little out of place. His clothes were worn, his hands rough and calloused from years of hard labor. He had never been this close to such wealth and beauty. But Lyra's presence beside him grounded him. She was his world, and no matter where they went, they were a family. They finally arrived at the Empress's chambers. The advisor knocked softly on the door, and after receiving a quiet reply, opened it. "Your Majesty," the advisor said, "I've brought a visitor, a mechanic and his daughter. They have something for you." Empress Aurelia looked up from her seat by the window, her eyes immediately locking onto Jax and Lyra. Her gaze softened, and she gestured for them to come in. Jax hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. He had never been in the presence of royalty before. But Lyra, ever fearless, stepped forward, holding out the small bundle of flowers she had made. "Happy birthday, Your Majesty," Lyra said, her voice soft but clear. Aurelia's eyes widened as she took the flowers from Lyra's hands. There was something about the simplicity of the gesture, something genuine in the child's innocence, that struck a chord in her heart. "Thank you," the Empress said, her voice warm. "You've made my day brighter." Jax watched the exchange, surprised by the Empress's response. She seemed different than he had imagined. She wasn't cold or distant. She wasn't the untouchable ruler he had always heard about. No, she was human. A person just like him. "Please," Aurelia continued, looking at Jax. "Come, sit with me for a while." Jax nodded, and he and Lyra took seats near her. For the first time in years, Aurelia didn't feel alone. A mechanic and his daughter, simple folk from the outskirts of the palace, had come to brighten her day. It wasn't the grand banquet she had been expecting, but it was better. It was real. As the conversation flowed between them, Jax felt a strange sense of peace. He had come here to make a difference, to do something good for the Empress. But now, as the sun began to set, he realized that this small act of kindness had made a difference in his own life as well. The Empress, once so distant, was no longer alone. The room fell silent as Empress Aurelia looked at Jax and his daughter, the small bundle of flowers still resting in her hands. The soft glow from the large windows cast a golden hue over the palace, and for a brief moment it felt as if time itself had slowed. The noise of the grand banquet preparations outside seemed distant, muffled, as if it belonged to another world entirely. In this moment, the only sounds that mattered were the steady ticking of a clock and the laughter of a child. Lyra, with her bright eyes and innocent smile, had somehow brought life back into this palace, and to Aurelia, it was a small miracle. She couldn't remember the last time someone had truly tried to connect with her, not as the Empress, but as a person. "Thank you," Aurelia said, her voice low but sincere. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've received in a long time." Jax, who had been watching silently, shifted his weight nervously. He wasn't sure what to say. In all his years of service in the palace, he'd never imagined he would find himself alone with the Empress, especially not in such an intimate setting. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the awkwardness. "We didn't mean to disturb you," he said, his tone careful. "We just thought, well, that maybe you needed something real today. It's easy to forget what a real birthday feels like in a place like this." Aurelia raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the honesty in his words. She had grown accustomed to the endless formalities, the kind words wrapped in velvet that lacked any true meaning. But here, in the presence of this mechanic and his child, there was no pretense, no careful political maneuvering. It was just genuine kindness, something she hadn't experienced in years. "I didn't think anyone would remember," Aurelia admitted, her fingers lightly tracing the petals of the flowers. "The people in my court are well-meaning, but they don't see me, not the real me. They only see the Empress, the ruler, the one who gives orders, not the woman who sometimes just wants to be seen." Lyra, always perceptive despite her young age, took a step forward, her small hand reaching out to touch the Empress's arm. "We see you," she said softly, her voice full of certainty. "You're not just the Empress. You're also Aurelia, and you don't have to be alone." Aurelia blinked back a sudden wave of emotion. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not in years. Her heart swelled, a mix of gratitude and sadness. She had been so focused on holding her empire together that she had lost touch with the simple truths, like the importance of human connection, of kindness, of being truly seen by someone. Jax's voice broke through the silence. "We don't have much," he said, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. "But if you'd like, we could stay a while. I'm sure Lyra would love to show you how she made the flowers. She's got quite a talent for crafting things from nothing." Aurelia smiled, a real, genuine smile this time, not one masked by the weight of her crown. "I would like that," she replied, her eyes glistening with something she hadn't felt in ages, hope. For the next hour, the conversation flowed easily. Lyra, eager to show her creation, took the flowers she had crafted from the remnants of materials she'd gathered from the palace gardens and demonstrated how she had woven them together. The child's passion was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, Aurelia felt a lightness she had forgotten existed. "Do you want to try?" Lyra asked, offering her a small piece of floral wire. Aurelia hesitated at first, unsure of her ability. She hadn't done something as simple as crafting flowers in years, but there was something warm in the air that made her feel safe. With a soft laugh, she accepted, and soon the three of them were sitting together, surrounded by colorful petals and delicate wires. Jax, watching the two women, felt a rare sense of contentment. His daughter had a way of bringing people together, and it was clear that she had done just that with the Empress. He wasn't sure what it was, but he sensed something shifting in the room. Aurelia wasn't the Empress today. She was just a woman, sitting with them, sharing in a small, humble joy. After a while, the flowers took shape, and though they were simple, they felt meaningful. Aurelia's hands, once so used to signing decrees and holding court, were now busy crafting something beautiful, something that didn't come with the weight of responsibility. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," Aurelia said softly, gazing at the flower she had made. "It's a simple thing, really, but it feels—" She paused, searching for the right word. "It feels real." Jax nodded, his face lighting up with understanding. "Sometimes it's the small things that matter the most." The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with a quiet understanding. No one felt the need to speak much anymore, not when their actions were saying everything that needed to be said. Just as Aurelia felt herself starting to truly relax, a soft knock on the door interrupted the peaceful moment. A palace servant entered, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the guests are starting to arrive for the banquet. They're awaiting your presence." Aurelia sighed, the weight of the royal duties crashing back down on her. She looked over at Jax and Lyra, a pang of reluctance settling in her chest. The world outside her chambers seemed so distant, so cold compared to the warmth in the room. "Must we go?" she asked, almost to herself. She glanced at Lyra, who was still playing with her flowers, completely unaware of the formality waiting outside. "I don't want to go back out there." Jax sensed her discomfort and stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. "We didn't mean to keep you, Your Majesty. We can leave if you need us to." But Aurelia shook her head, her eyes thoughtful. "No, stay," she said. "Stay a little longer. I want to enjoy this moment." With a smile, Jax sat back down, and the three of them continued to share stories, laugh, and create flowers. In the comfort of her own chambers, Aurelia finally felt like she had a choice not to be the Empress for once. And as the evening light faded, she knew she would never forget this unexpected encounter. It had brought her something she hadn't realized she was missing: connection. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The light, soft and golden, seemed to make everything glow, casting a sense of calm and warmth over the three of them. The banquet preparations had been forgotten for now, and in its place, an easy silence enveloped the room, filled only by the occasional sound of Lyra's laughter as she showed Aurelia how to make a flower out of a scrap of cloth. The tension that had been lingering in Aurelia's heart began to fade. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the weight of an empire rested on her shoulders. She didn't feel like a ruler in a cold, distant palace. She was simply Aurelia, sitting in her chambers with a mechanic and his daughter, working on something simple and beautiful. Jax, watching them both, couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had come here with nothing more than a desire to do something kind, something small to brighten the day of a woman who had spent far too long alone in her power. Yet, somehow, this simple gesture had turned into something far more meaningful than he could have imagined. "Your Majesty," Jax said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've never seen you so relaxed." Aurelia looked up, a soft smile gracing her lips. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," she said quietly. "How much I missed just being, not thinking about politics, not thinking about my responsibilities, just enjoying something for its own sake." Jax nodded, understanding all too well. His life had been built on simple things, fixing things, spending time with his daughter, making the most out of whatever they had. And yet he had often felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as well, especially since his wife's passing. Life hadn't always been easy for him, but it had been real, with love and laughter woven through the tough moments. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes we get so caught up in what we're supposed to be doing that we forget to just live." Aurelia's gaze softened. "I've spent so many years looking at the bigger picture, at the empire and its needs, that I've neglected what truly matters. I've neglected myself." She paused for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the flowers they had made. "Thank you, Jax." And thank you, Lyra. You've reminded me of something I've forgotten. Lyra, who had been playing quietly with the flowers on the floor, looked up at Aurelia with a bright smile. You don't have to thank us, she said with innocence. We just wanted to make you happy. Aurelia's heart swelled. She had never felt so understood. The sincerity in Lyra's words, the simplicity of the gesture, had melted the barriers that had built up over the years. She was no longer just the Empress, the ruler of a vast galaxy. She was just another person, sharing a quiet moment with two people who saw her as something more than her title. I never thought a simple gift could bring so much, Aurelia said, her voice thick with emotion. I've spent so long surrounded by wealth and power, by people who only see what I represent, not who I am. I forgot what it's like to just exist as myself. Jax, hearing the vulnerability in her voice, felt a mix of sympathy and respect. He had known the pain of losing his wife and raising Lyra alone. He had known what it was like to feel isolated, even in a room full of people. But he also knew the power of human connection, of the small moments that made life worth living. You don't have to be anyone other than yourself, Jax said gently. We're all just trying to get by, to make the most of the time we have. Aurelia nodded, the weight of his words settling in her heart. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like that, without expectation, without seeking something, in return. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed easily, and they spoke about everything and nothing. They shared stories of their lives, of their families, and of the simple joys they found in the world around them. Aurelia learned about Jax's humble beginnings, about how he had come to work at the palace, and how his love for his daughter had shaped his life. She learned about Lyra's imaginative world, about the little games she played and the dreams she had of traveling to distant stars. By the time the servant had returned to remind her of the banquet, the feeling in the room had changed completely. The walls, once so cold and imposing, now felt warm and inviting. Aurelia didn't feel the urgency to join the grand affair outside. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had everything she needed right here, in this quiet corner of the palace. I'm not going out there, she said suddenly, her voice firm. Not tonight, Jax raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? It's your birthday, after all. I know, Aurelia said, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. But tonight, I want to do something different. I want to spend this time with you, with Lyra. I don't need a grand banquet to feel special. Lyra's face lit up at the Empress's words. We can have our own party, she exclaimed. We can play games and eat cake, just the three of us. Aurelia laughed, the sound light and genuine. That sounds perfect, she said. Let's have our own little celebration. Jax smiled, watching the two of them. It wasn't what he had expected when he had first arrived at the palace. But as he saw the joy in Aurelia's eyes, the relief that came from simply being herself, he realized that sometimes the simplest moments were the most important. The evening passed in a peaceful, almost magical way. There was no pomp or ceremony, no grand speeches or elaborate decorations. There was just Aurelia, Jax, and Lyra sitting together and enjoying the small moments that made life worth living. They ate simple food, shared stories, and laughed, genuine laughter that filled the room with warmth. As the night drew to a close and the palace settled into quiet, Aurelia looked at her new friends with a sense of peace she had not felt in years. She had spent so long feeling like she had to live up to expectations, like she had to be something she wasn't. But now, for the first time in a long time, she realized that she didn't have to be anyone other than herself. Thank you, she said again, her voice soft. This has been the best birthday I've ever had. Jax and Lyra exchanged a look, their hearts full. They hadn't come for thanks. They had come because they saw a woman who was lost in her own power, a woman who needed to feel human again. And now, as the night came to an end, they knew that they had given her something far more valuable than any grand celebration ever could. The warmth that filled the room lingered long after the simple birthday celebration ended. The evening had been unlike any other, a stark contrast to the grandiose banquets that Aurelia had grown accustomed to. There had been no speeches, no extravagant gifts, only the shared comfort of good company and genuine kindness. As Aurelia sat back in her chair, her heart felt lighter, her spirit renewed. She had felt truly seen for the first time in ages, not as a ruler, but as a woman. But the night was far from over. "I'm glad you both came," Aurelia said softly, looking at Jax and Lyra, who were seated across from her. "This has been exactly what I needed. I had no idea how much I was missing." Jax smiled, wiping his hands on his worn overalls, the marks of a day well spent. "I'm just glad we could bring a little happiness. It's not every day you get to meet someone like you, Your Majesty." Aurelia shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Please, Jax, call me Aurelia. I'm tired of being Your Majesty." "You got it, Aurelia," Jax replied, his voice warm. Lyra, who had been playing with the last of the flowers they had crafted earlier, looked up at the Empress. "Are we going to have cake?" she asked innocently. "I love cake." Aurelia smiled at the child's enthusiasm, feeling an unexpected joy at the simplicity of her question. "Cake, huh?" she mused. "I think I could use a slice myself. But I don't know if we have any cake here." Just as she spoke the words, the door to the room opened quietly, and a palace servant stepped inside. "Your Majesty," the servant said, bowing low, "forgive the interruption, but there is a surprise waiting for you in the dining hall. It's been prepared for you. A special birthday treat." Aurelia blinked, surprised. "A surprise?" she asked, glancing at Jax and Lyra, who both looked just as confused as she was. "I wasn't expecting anything else." The servant smiled gently. "The royal kitchen has prepared a small cake for you, one of your favorites. It's not much, but it's a token of appreciation from the palace." Aurelia felt a rush of warmth in her chest. It wasn't the grand affair she was used to, but this was something personal, something that came from the heart. "I didn't ask for this," Aurelia said, her voice quiet. "I've been avoiding the banquet, and yet they've prepared something for me?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the servant replied. "It's just a small gesture from those who care about you." Aurelia's heart swelled at the thought. Despite her years of feeling isolated, despite the loneliness she often faced, there were still people in her life who cared for her. She had forgotten how important it was to remember those small gestures, the ones that came not from obligation, but from genuine affection. "Thank you," Aurelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you to everyone who helped prepare this." The servant gave a small bow and exited the room, leaving Aurelia, Jax, and Lyra alone once again. For a moment, the three of them just sat in silence, absorbing the unexpected kindness that had filled the air. "I wasn't expecting this," Aurelia said softly, her hand resting on the arm of her chair. "But I'm glad. It's a reminder that I'm not as alone as I sometimes feel." Jax, who had been watching her, nodded. People often forget that even the most powerful rulers need love and care. Everyone, no matter their station, needs to feel seen. Aurelia met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've shown me that tonight. You and Lyra." She paused, her voice softening. "It's not often I get to experience what true kindness feels like." Before Jax could respond, Lyra tugged on Aurelia's sleeve. "Can we go see the cake now?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Aurelia chuckled and looked at Jax, who gave a playful shrug. "I guess we better go see what all the fuss is about." With that, the three of them left the chamber, heading down the grand hallway of the palace. The atmosphere, once so cold and distant, now felt different, lighter. The castle, which had always been a place of power and formality, seemed more like a home in this moment. As they entered the dining hall, Aurelia was greeted by a small but charming table set in the middle of the room. The cake was simple but beautifully decorated, adorned with fresh fruit and delicate frosting. It wasn't as grand as the banquet she usually hosted, but it was perfect in its simplicity. "This looks lovely," Aurelia said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not what I expected, but it's exactly what I needed." Lyra clapped her hands. "Can I cut the first slice?" Aurelia smiled. "Of course, Lyra. It's your party, too." The child eagerly grabbed a small knife and carefully cut the first slice, her eyes wide with excitement. Jax chuckled at her enthusiasm, and Aurelia couldn't help but feel a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in so long. As they sat down to eat, Aurelia realized that this moment was everything she had been searching for. It wasn't about wealth or power or the grand celebrations she had always been expected to host. It was about connection, about sharing a moment with people who truly cared. Jax and Lyra had brought more joy into her life than she had ever imagined. They had shown her that sometimes the smallest gestures were the most meaningful. A simple cake, a moment of laughter, and the warmth of companionship were all it took to make her feel less alone. For the first time in years, Aurelia felt truly at peace. She wasn't just a ruler anymore. She was a person, someone who had been given the gift of connection and love. And as the night wore on, Aurelia knew that this would be a birthday she would never forget. A birthday where she had finally felt seen, heard, and loved. The night had slowly wrapped itself in silence, and the soft glow of candles flickered across the dining table, casting gentle shadows on the faces of those gathered. Aurelia, Jax, and Lyra were seated together, the remnants of the cake still on their plates, the warmth of shared laughter lingering in the air. For the first time in years, the Empress didn't feel like the weight of the universe was resting on her shoulders. She wasn't the ruler of a galaxy tonight. She was just Aurelia, a woman who had found comfort and joy in the simplest of moments. As they finished their last bites of cake, the peaceful atmosphere was interrupted by a sudden sound, the soft chiming of a distant bell. Aurelia looked up, her heart sinking slightly. The bell signaled the end of the evening, and the palace was beginning to return to its formal rhythms. The grand banquet outside, the one she had so carefully avoided, would soon come to an end. The festivities, the speeches, the applause, it all felt like a distant world now. She had found more happiness in the quiet moments spent with Jax and Lyra than in the entire evening of royal affairs. "It's time to go back out there, isn't it?" Aurelia said softly, a hint of reluctance in her voice. Jax looked at her, his eyes understanding. "If you need to, Your Majesty, but you don't have to. You've already made this night special." Aurelia shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "I think I've had enough of grand ceremonies and formalities for one night." Lyra, who had been listening quietly, looked up with wide eyes. "You don't have to go if you don't want to, right?" Aurelia's heart swelled at the simple question, the innocence of it reminding her that sometimes the most important decisions in life came from a place of pure honesty. "No, Lyra," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't have to go. Not tonight. I've spent enough time in the spotlight. Tonight, I want to be where I feel at peace." Jax smiled warmly. "That's your choice, Aurelia. It's your night." For a moment, the three of them simply sat there, letting the stillness settle around them. The quiet of the palace seemed to embrace them, as though the walls themselves were acknowledging the bond they had formed. It wasn't a bond built on titles, riches, or power. It was a bond of understanding, of shared moments that had no need for formality or expectation. "Think I've been so focused on what I was supposed to be," Aurelia said, her voice reflective, "that I forgot how to just live, just be myself." Jax looked at her thoughtfully. "It's easy to forget, especially when you're constantly surrounded by the demands of being someone else. But you're more than your title, Aurelia. You're someone with a heart, with feelings, just like anyone else." Aurelia smiled at him, a gentle, knowing smile. "I used to believe that. But over time, I became so wrapped up in being the Empress that I lost touch with who I really am. But tonight has been different." Lyra, ever the innocent, perked up. "I like the new Aurelia. She's fun," she exclaimed, bouncing slightly in her seat. "Can we play more games?" Aurelia's laugh was light, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't a laugh weighed down by expectations. "Of course, Lyra. We can play as long as you like." Jax chuckled softly. "You've made quite the impression on her, Aurelia." The Empress looked at Lyra, her heart softening. The little girl's unwavering optimism had somehow cut through the walls Aurelia had spent years building around herself. In those moments of laughter, of simple joy, Aurelia had found something she hadn't even realized she was missing: the freedom to be vulnerable, to be human. "We should thank you both," Aurelia said, looking at them seriously, her gaze full of gratitude. "You've given me more than just a lovely birthday. You've reminded me of who I am, not just as a ruler, but as a person who deserves to laugh, to smile, and to be loved." Jax felt a warmth in his chest at her words. "You've always been more than just a ruler, Aurelia. It's just that sometimes it takes someone else to help us see it." The Empress nodded, her gaze drifting toward the window, where the stars twinkled softly in the night sky. "I've spent so much time thinking about what my people need, what the galaxy needs, that I've forgotten what I need. But now, with both of you here, I feel like I've found that balance again." Lyra, who had been fiddling with the flowers they had made earlier, looked up with a bright grin. "So, we're friends now?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Aurelia's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected to find such genuine friendship in the most unlikely of places. She looked at Jax, who smiled at her with that familiar warmth. "We're more than just friends," Aurelia said, her voice strong and filled with emotion. "We're family. And family doesn't need to be bound by blood or titles. It's bound by love, kindness, and the willingness to be there for each other." Jax and Lyra both smiled at her words. It wasn't just a gesture. It wasn't just a passing thought. Aurelia meant it. She truly meant it. The night had changed her, had opened her heart in a way she hadn't thought possible. She had spent years living in isolation, separated from the world she had been born to lead. But now, with Jax and Lyra by her side, she realized that she didn't have to face the world alone. As they sat together, the world outside seemed less daunting, less cold. The stars that dotted the sky no longer felt like distant, unreachable points of light. They felt like a reminder that there was so much more to life than power and responsibility. There was connection, there was laughter, and there was love. Aurelia knew that her journey was far from over. She still had an empire to lead, a galaxy to protect. But for the first time, she felt like she had the strength to face it all. Not as the lonely Empress who had been lost in her own world, but as someone who had rediscovered her own humanity. And with that, the night came to a close, not with the formality of a royal banquet, but with the quiet understanding that new beginnings were always possible. No matter how late in the game they seemed, Aurelia smiled to herself as she looked at the two people who had changed her life forever. "Thank you," she whispered. for everything. And for the first time in years, Aurelia truly believed that everything would be all right.